Hi biology students, this is Mrs. Goldtree going over the properties of water today. So starting up, life in outer space. So NASA is always searching for water on other planets, and in 2015 they confirmed that liquid water was found on Mars. This is one of the moons of Jupiter here, this picture. And they believe that it has a subsurface ocean, so that this is all covered in ice, but all of these fissures that you see on the surface is actually ice that has shifted. So why are they looking for water on other planets? That's because life requires water. If we can find water on another planet, possibly that planet could support life. Water is essential for life to exist. Without it, no organism could exist. So even though this isn't a chemistry class, understanding the properties of water is important to understanding life. Starting with the water molecule itself, sometimes they say that water molecules look like Mickey Mouse. I think that was referenced in your biochemistry notes. And so I just wanted to show you this is why they say that, because you can see there's the face and then the ears here. Well, the oxygen molecule here, oxygen atom and the two hydrogen atoms, they share electrons, and that's called a covalent bond. Anytime electrons are shared between atoms, this is called a covalent bond. But the oxygen is more electronegative. It shares the electrons more strongly than the hydrogen does. And this is called a polar molecule. So when a molecule has its electrons are not shared equally, that's called a polar molecule. And water is a polar molecule. What bond holds individual water molecules together? Covalent bonds. Okay, and this symbol here is the Greek letter delta, and it means partial. So sometimes you'll see there's a partial negative here next to the oxygen atom, because oxygen is partially negative. It has more of those electrons. And then there's a partial positive next to the hydrogens because they are less electronegative or more positive. When you put a whole bunch of water molecules together, the partial positive portion of one water molecule will be attracted to the partial negative end of another water molecule. These are called hydrogen bonds. And hydrogen bonds are relatively weak, but because water is such a small molecule, in one drop of water there could be trillions of water molecules. Because there's so many of them collectively, it ends up being a strong force or a strong bond together. So individually weak, but collectively strong. Okay, you need to fill in a diagram showing 5 water molecules. So you might want to pause this for a second and write this down. And don't forget to include where the covalent bond is, where the hydrogen bonds are, and then start up next with the properties of water. So now that you know a little bit about how the bonds in a water molecule work and how the bonds between molecules work, we can talk about some really important properties of water. And they have these properties all because of those bonds. So one of those properties is surface tension. Surface tension is caused by cohesion, which is the attraction between molecules of the same substance. So this is talking about water with water. One water molecule with another water molecule. And we just talked about that, how there's these hydrogen bonds that attract each other. Water is when you see water on the surface of a table or on a leaf like this, it kind of balls up a little bit, and that's because of surface tension. Because of the cohesion, those hydrogen bonds between the water molecules, they want to form together and create kind of like a skin over the surface Okay, so why is surface tension important? Well, you know, who cares about a water striders? Are they able to walk on water? It doesn't really matter. They can go walk on land, right? Or they can go extinct. But if water wasn't cohesive, if that attraction wasn't occurring between the water molecules, they would all evaporate. So we couldn't have large bodies of water. They would evaporate too quickly. We couldn't have lakes and streams. So obviously this is an important property. Next, capillary action. The capillary action is due to adhesion. So cohesion is water-to-water attraction. Adhesion is the attraction between a water molecule and a different substance. So if you look at a test tube, you'll see that this kind of smiley face forms, and this is called a meniscus. And on the middle part, there's the skin that forms. That's due to cohesion between the water molecules. But then the water will also adhere to the edge of the glass, and that's called adhesion. And so my question for you is, how can a redwood move water from its roots all the way up to its leaves? Does it have a pump inside? Well, no, it doesn't have a pump. It's due to capillary action. If you put tubes into a dish of water, a tube with a larger diameter will not carry water up as high as a tube with a very thin diameter. And that's because there is more surface area in a thinner tube, and so the water is able to adhere to the edges of that tube better. So likewise, in a plant or a tree, water enters through the roots through osmosis, and then it moves up the bark of the plant, or the center part of the plant, the vascular tissue, which is called xylem in plants. And the xylem is basically really thin capillaries, and water moves its way up against gravity to the leaves by capillary action. Okay, another property of water is that it's the universal solvent. So perhaps you've tried to clean a dirty dish and you scrubbed it with a sponge over and over again, and you couldn't get all the food gunk off of your dish, especially with sugar, dried on sugar. And so you just soak it with water, you put a whole bunch of water into the dish, and you let it sit overnight, and the next morning you try to clean it off. It's really easy to clean. And that's because water is polar and it helps dissolve a lot of substances. So what makes water such a good solvent? It's a polar molecule. And here you see salt molecules being, they're actually ionizing here. They're separating into their positive ions, the cations, and then the anions, the negative parts of the salt molecule. And the positive ends are being attracted to the negative chloride ion, and the negative ends are attracted to the sodium ions. So it is able to dissolve a solute easily. Now, why is this property so important in biology? Well, in animals, our blood is made up mostly of water, and we carry a lot of things inside our blood. We carry proteins and enzymes and hormones and sugars and sodium ions and potassium ions. If those solutes didn't dissolve in our blood, they would start to clump up, and we wouldn't be able to freely move those substances throughout our body. And same goes for plants too. They have a vascular system, and they carry sugars and other substances through their vascular system. It's important that those substances can be dissolved within water. There's two properties here. I know you just have the high heat of vaporization, but high specific heat is related to high heat of vaporization. So the high specific heat means that it takes a long time for water to heat up and cool off. It takes a long time for all those bonds between the hydrogen bonds between the molecules to get enough energy to break apart. So water's able to absorb lots of heat and it releases that heat really slowly. So if this is important, because if water didn't absorb heat so well when we ran or just did a jog, our blood would boil, or as the sun is hitting on a lake, this is a picture of 2 of my kids here in a lake, then the temperature would fluctuate really quickly in the lake, and then plants and animals couldn't survive. So that's an important property. And then related to that is it takes a long time, once that heat is absorbed, it takes a lot of energy for that heat or the water to evaporate. And as water evaporates off of our skin, that can also cool us down because it absorbs heat. Okay, our last property, why does ice float? Well, here's a picture of liquid water at the atomic level. You can see all these water molecules are kind of shaking around really quickly, and they don't really have a pattern to the way that they're moving. But as water gets colder and freezes, it forms this lattice-like structure, and the structure forms because of the hydrogen bonds, and it just kind of freezes into place. And you can see how there are all these spaces that form too, and that means that ice is less dense than liquid water. And so since it has lower density, we know the less dense things will float. That allows ice to float. And that's not common for most substances. If you have a solid form and a liquid form, like say you have solid argon and liquid argon, the solid argon would sink to the bottom of the liquid. Water is one of those few substances where the solid form floats on top. What is the importance of this? Well, the ice on top of lakes and oceans help insulate the water from colder air temperatures. If the ice wasn't on the top, if it sunk to the bottom of the ocean, that ice would never melt. The sunlight couldn't penetrate through the darker parts of the ocean, and so it would just continually build up, and then animals and creatures that live at the bottoms of lakes and oceans would not be able to survive. Okay, I hope this helps. Let me know if you have any questions.